Do you think Mohammed al-Sudani will actually get a second term in office? Also, do you think it matters?
Donnie doesn't control his destiny, but he's trying to get a second term. The big question is whether Iran will say no.
Welcome to this week's Iraq briefing, where we discuss the top stories shaping Iraq today. I am Omar Nadawi, and I'm once again joined by Ahmed Ali, our visiting senior fellow here at EPIC. Ahmed, it's great to see you again.
It's wonderful to be with you, Omar, and it's really a good day to be with you with Iraq having qualified to the World Cup playoffs as well.
Fantastic news, yeah. For last time was 1986, so
That is correct. So we are
yeah,
looking forward to Iraq playing in the World Cup next year.
that's awesome. All right, so today we ask the question: who really won Iraq's election? On November 11, more than 12 million Iraqis cast their votes to elect a new parliament in the sixth election in 20 years. The results are in, with Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani's coalition coming in first with 46 seats. The results also showed higher turnout than many Iraq watchers, myself included, expected to see. At 56% of registered voters, it's 13 points higher than in 2021. I'm really still trying to figure out what explains this. With party platforms largely devoid of real policy proposals, was the higher turnout driven mainly by more effective mobilization through tribal and patronage networks? Or were they primarily driven by a more genuine sense of stability and a renewed hope among Iraqi voters? Ahmed, let's start with the turnout trends. What's your reading on this?
Well, I do think there are a number of reasons for this turnout. First, we did see effective mobilization by the different political groups, and you saw that not just online but offline as well on the ground. The political parties did spend a great deal of money, a great deal of effort to reach out to voters and encourage turnout in the elections, and that's why these elections cost about $3 to $4 billion based on some estimates. So it seems that all that money being poured into the system has paid off in terms of voter turnout. And of course, within that mobilization, it will be good to keep in mind that the powers that be at this point they do have their own loyalist base of supporters, and those supporters will support them and will go out and vote, and they do want to see the continuation of these groups being in power. So whether that is voters affiliated with the Reconstruction and Development Coalition, the coalition led by Prime Minister Sudani, or voters affiliated with the State of Law Alliance, led by former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, or even with other groups such as Asab al-Haq, AAH. Those groups at this point they have a set level of support within society, and they clearly urge them and encourage them very strongly to go out and vote. And if you extend it beyond those groups, the same thing happened with the Kurdistan Democratic Party in Kurdistan and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK in Kurdistan. They led very energetic campaigns, I would say. They did not take anything for granted, and they wanted their voters to go and vote. The second, I think, reason is that as opposed to the 2021 elections, these elections witnessed the participation of the big names, so to speak. For example, Nouri al-Maliki was on the ballot. The Prime Minister Mohammed Shah Sudani was on the ballot as well, and other figures, other senior figures were on the ballot as well. When you see those senior figures on the ballot, it does encourage voters to go out and vote because these are known names and known personalities. So you will have people go out and vote, and I think that's a big reason for why we saw this. In 2021, the nature of the electoral system was multi-district in one province, and as a result, the big names did not participate. They stayed back. It was their candidates running in certain neighborhoods in Baghdad, for example, or certain neighborhoods in Duhok in Kurdistan. This time, the electoral system allowed for the participation and the draw of those big names, and that's what happened. And I do believe the third reason for this turnout is you alluded to it is the relative stability in the country and the relative construction boom and the level of luxury that some Iraqis are feeling. So it wouldn't surprise me if some Iraqis really went out and voted to see the continuation of what they have seen over the last 3 to 4 years. But I do have to say, you wrote a wonderful piece for the Atlantic Council, is that this phenomenon will need further studying and further analysis because the predictions before the elections were that voter turnout was going to go down.
I know Iraqis proved us wrong again.
They have the tendency
Eh,
to do that every once in a while, yeah.
that is true. That is true. Now let's move one layer deeper into the onion of Iraqi politics, and let's talk about the results in terms of seat distribution. Were there any surprises in your assessment compared to your pre-election predictions?
Before we get into the surprises, I think it's important to just talk about the five winners, let's say, or the top five winners of the election. So you do have the Reconstruction and Development Coalition (RDC), led by Prime Minister Sudani, that received 46 votes, and it is the highest seat getter, as we call it. And then after that, you do have the Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, and his list is also there. Former Speaker of Parliament Mohammed al-Halbousi proved staying power, and he's also in the top five. In Kurdistan, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, the KDP, also came out on top with 26 seats. And then what surprised many people, many observers, is Asab Ahl al-Haq, because they got 28 seats in these elections. In 2014, they only had one seat. So in the span of 10 years, they were able to get 27 seats, and that shows their level of ability to mobilize, as I described earlier, and reach out to voters and establish a social base of support. Because for them, that has always been the challenge when compared to the Sadrists. But it seems that AAH has made that transition. So these are the top five seat getters in the elections. I think the biggest surprise is the underperformance by the RDC and Prime Minister Soudani. He ran in the elections himself, and he only received 92,000 votes. That is not a big number of votes for an incumbent prime minister, for a prime minister who is all over the media. He's all over social media as well, and an effective communicator as well. So the fact that he personally only got 92,000 votes was a big surprise. The fact that the RDC only got 46 seats is also a surprise because their expectation, even from the RDC itself, was that they will get at least 100 seats before. That's what they were predicting before the elections. So I think that's the biggest surprise, because if you compare other results from previous elections, the incumbent prime minister usually gets in the hundreds of thousands of votes, just personally for himself, not for the list. So that's the biggest surprise, in my opinion. Perhaps the third surprise is the better organization as well. The better organization performed particularly well. It received 21 votes or 21 seats to keep a strong presence in the parliament. And for both of them, for AAH and Badr, these national wins will consolidate their provincial wins. Because if you look at different provinces in southern Iraq, you see Badr organization in governor position or chairman of the provincial council position, and the same thing for AAH. So the fact that both groups were able to consolidate their provincial wins from the 2023 elections with these wins, I think is a big surprise.
I remember, two things that come to mind. What you said about prime ministers, incumbents winning a lot of votes in the past. I remember in 2010, Noor al-Maliki, Tariq al-Hashimi, and Alawi, each one of them won like 500,000 votes in the provinces they were competing in. And I agree that Asaib and Badr's performance has been uh, you know, quite good compared to 2021 combined. They won 18 seats, if I remember correctly, but now they've almost tripled that between Badr's almost 20 seats and Asaib's 27. So they're definitely cementing their gains, as you suggested.
I
Uh,
think Omar, it also shows that politics in Iraq for a good time, it became stagnant. I would say between perhaps 2022 to 2024, it started to take shape in terms of defining characteristics of leaders or themes within the politics of it. But what these results have shown us is that there's a lot of dynamism in the Iraqi elections and in Iraqi politics, and therefore, as you know, as telling the results can be about the powers in position, their continuation to control the levers of power. You can still compete, and that lesson can be applied for the Tishrini forces, and it can also be applied for other groups. Is that there is still space for competition, but you will need a lot of resources to be dominant or to achieve some good results.
And speaking of the Tishrinis, I think their performance was one of the surprises or disappointments in that the main coalition for Tishrini forces, Al Badil, was expecting about 15 to 20 seats or hoping to get 15 to 20 seats, and it seems like they have not won a single seat, which is, I think, quite a setback for that, pro-reform movement that is not, attached to any of the establishment parties.
I do agree with you, Omar, is that with the Tishrinis, it is also a big surprise, but there is space for them to regroup and relearn from this campaign and set realistic expectations about what they can achieve and how to achieve it. It is not a done situation for them. There is still some hope for them, that's for sure.
Agreed, agreed. Now let's talk about next steps and government formation. Earlier this week, the coordination framework came together and formally claimed the title of the largest bloc in parliament, and with that, the right to nominate the next prime minister. Now, on the one hand, as we discussed, Sudani has won the most seats of any coordination framework faction, which gives him an edge for sure, and perhaps perception of entitlement to be the next prime minister. But we also know that several powerful coordination framework factions, including Maliki and Katab Hezbollah, do not really want Sudani to stay in power. So how do you see this struggle playing out within the coordination framework? Are we likely to end up with the framework picking another weak compromise candidate for a after a prolonged impasse between Sudani and his rivals?
The coordination framework is in control now of the country. This is one of the clearest outcomes of these elections, and that outcome, even over the last week, is becoming realized and publicly talked about by Iraqi Kurdish groups, Iraqi Sunni groups, is that we have to deal with the coordination framework. And I think the other realization is that it is not just the coordination framework, but different political groups that have armed wings, or as we call them in Iraq, fasail, the armed factions. The armed factions are also politically set in the Iraq political system now because out of the 329 seats, by the latest estimates, about 106 seats are controlled by Fasail now. That gives them a lot of political power, that gives them a lot of leverage, and the fact that the coordination framework is in control now and has been in control for the last 4 years allows them to dictate the legislative agenda for the next parliament. That's the first situation that we have, and we saw a level of savviness by the coordination framework because there was some concern or at least an anticipation that, for example, Sudani would challenge the definition of the largest group and he would seek a court ruling about who the largest group is. That way he can lead the first attempt to form a government. But we saw that Sudani quickly, I would say, folded and rejoined the coordination framework. And now it is the largest bloc. Therefore, there was some savviness by the coordination framework to accept Sudani quickly as well, and ensure that there is no cracks within its walls, as we have seen it before the elections. The second part, however, is about the next prime minister. And I think, again, the coordination framework is showing some savviness in handling that portfolio. They have already stated many of the powerful elements of the coordination framework that the next prime minister should not be politically ambitious. In other words, no more Sudani experience, no more, Mustafa Kadhimi experience, no more Haider Abadi experience, because all of these figures, they wanted to form, they either formed their own political group and competed for a second term, or were seriously considering doing so. So the coordination framework wants to deny that opportunity, and I think it will find takers as well, because you do have a second generation of leaders in Iraq, and among that second generation, you will have candidates who can accept the conditions set by the coordination framework for the prime minister position. And I think the last point on the way forward is that it is very likely that the next prime minister will be a consensus prime minister, and as a result, a weaker prime minister, because uh, that is what the coordination framework wants, and that's likely what's to happen.
So you kind of almost have already answered what was going to be my next question, which it seems that the your perception is that the coordination framework is going to emerge from this election stronger and more powerful when it comes to controlling the legislative and executive agenda in government in Iraq, even regardless of who the prime minister is going to be. Is that
I
is
think
that
I think
a good encapsulation of your comment?
I think that is correct, and I think the big pressure that it will face clearly is the economic situation in Iraq, because you already are seeing delay in public sector salaries, and there's already a liquidity crisis in Iraq. And some public sector employees, including retirees, are receiving salaries in 45 days as opposed to every 30 days. So therefore, there is pressure on the coordination framework, and that pressure I think, will be higher if the United States decides to play a more active role in government formation, because so far the U.S. has been using economic leverage to pressure various elements within the coordination framework. So how the coordination framework approaches the economic challenge that's coming up, I think, will also be a big question.
I just want to reflect on something you said, which is fascinating. I haven't looked at the election results that way, but you mentioned that the armed factions, the armed factions part of the coordination framework has about 106 seats that they control in parliament. And that this is to me, this is shocking. Because going back to 2021, the entire coordination framework had 50 seats the day after the election. And now we're talking about 106 just for the armed factions, not counting the state of law, not counting Nur al-Maliki or Sudani. So this is I think, reflects a massive increase in the power in the electoral weight of the coordination framework. I think that can be in and of itself one of the biggest surprises, I think, in this election and what it implies for Iraq's governance going forward. One final question, Ahmed. Let's talk about some new names that have emerged in this election. And one of them that comes to mind is Al Mawqif Al Watani, is a small political party out of the Kurdistan region, primarily out of Sulaymaniyah. Sort of relatively new name in Kurdish politics. They won 5 seats in a very tight electoral environment. What do we know about the party, and what happened to the previous opposition parties of Goran, Change Movement, and New Generation?
So the موقف الوطني, or the national stance in English, is a political group led by an MP in the Kurdistan parliament named Ali Hama Saleh. He used to be with Change Movement, Goran, but he left that movement and formed it to run in the Kurdistan parliamentary elections last year, and they performed well in those elections, and they decided to run in these elections as well. And their performance I think is being viewed as a respectable performance because it's not easy to contest or compete in the Kurdistan region, given just the nature of the political system and the dominance by the two ruling parties. The challenge for them, of course, is maintaining that opposition stance essentially, so for the national stance, how to be an opposition an opposition stance all the time, because there have been other opposition groups in Kurdistan, and they did not sustain themselves. They could not continue. But clearly what the national stance did is took advantage of the fact that the new generation movement led by Shah Suar Abdul Wahid was not effective in these elections. Plus, it did receive a lot of criticism for its performance and just its positions in Kurdistan. And that's why I think the national stance is looking at what happened with the new generation movement and learning from those lessons. But it remains to be seen, I think, if it's going to be a sustainable, political force in Kurdistan.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being with us again, Ahmed. Appreciate the analysis. This is it for this briefing. By the way, if you are interested in more analysis of Iraq's recent election, our colleague Eric Gustafson will have a piece that's analyzing the results and their implications, and it's going to be coming out on our website, enablingpeace.org. If you've enjoyed this analysis, please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends who might be interested in staying up to date on events in Iraq. You can get our weekly updates on Iraq and other reports and analysis by visiting our website at enablingpeace.org. And until next time, ma salama.